gentlemen, please make your way to the seating area. The presentations are due to start shortly. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, please make your way to the seating area. The presentations are due to start shortly. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, please make your way to the seating area. The presentations will start shortly. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. We're really pleased that you're able to join us here this afternoon. I'm Julia Skorupska. I'm the head of the Powering Past Coal Alliance Secretariat, and I'm going to be guiding you through the event this afternoon. We've got a really exciting agenda, and we want to get to it really soon. But before we start, we have a couple of bits of housekeeping that we have to share with you. So first of all, we're really pleased to be here in this retired coal power station in the year that the UK phases out coal. It's a really super cool venue, I'm sure you'll all agree. And I know I'm very tempted to play with some of the dials, but the people who look after this venue have told us that it's very fragile, so they ask us please not to do that, and please not to open the windows. They also tell us that we're not expecting any fire drills this afternoon, so if we do hear an alarm, they'll come out and they'll guide us out the building. And then finally, the last bit of housekeeping is, should you need to use a bathroom this afternoon, there's a large number of bathrooms just behind this screen here. So that's all the housekeeping over, so we can start with the exciting bit now. And we're really excited to have with us to open our event this afternoon, the Executive Director of the International Energy Agency, Dr. Fatih Birol. Dr. Birol, can I welcome you to the stage?
So, dear colleagues, it's great to be here in this venue. Thank you very much for the invitation. And it is really a pleasure to join the high-level dialogue of the Powering Past Coal Alliance. And I am very happy that I just saw that the COP29 President, Mr. Babayev, just joined that. Mr. Minister, thank you very much for joining us today. And many thanks to the Canadian and the UK governments for leading this effort, as well as other countries, like as far as I know, France, Germany, and the others have joined. So, dear colleagues, what I thought is to give you an overview about investments, where the energy investments go, who is making money, which sectors of the energy sector attracts money. What we do at the International Energy Agency, we measure every year what is the entire budget of the global energy sector. Coal, oil, solar, nuclear power, gas, natural gas, everything from A to Z. For example, when we say oil, from upstream investment to refineries, from refineries to other downstream areas. Entire picture. It gives us also a feeling whether or not the challenges in front of us in terms of energy security, climate change, affordability of the energy prices, we are in the right direction or not in the right direction. Okay. So this year, we have found out that looking at the entire energy sector, thousands of data mining, this is the strength of the year, we have all the data of energy at our fingertips. It says this year, the entire budget of the global energy sector is $3 trillion US. So $3 trillion US. And where does this money go? Very roughly, 1 trillion US dollars goes for fossil fuels, coal plus oil plus gas, 1 trillion, and 2 trillion goes to clean energy. Only 7-8 years ago, it was 1-to-1. 1 trillion for fossil fuels, 1 trillion for clean energy. And now, clean energy investments in the last 7-8 years increased from 1 trillion to 2 trillion US dollars. In my view, this is a great news that we are seeing the clean energy investment is going up. And dear colleagues, it is not going up mainly as a result of to save the planet concerns. The money is going up because many clean energy options are cost attractive, cost-effective. Second, many countries have understood that the future of their economy, future of their industry lies in clean energy manufacturing, and they don't want to be stuck with the old technologies. So this is good news. We see that about $3 trillion and 2 for clean and 1 for fossil fuels. Now, there are 2 buts here in this good news. What are those 2 buts? But of this $2 trillion clean energy, 85% is taking place in the advanced economies and China. 15% of the clean energy investments is in emerging and developing countries where you have the 2/3 of the global population. So there's a big mismatch there. Because that part, emerging and developing countries, is the part where the energy, where the emissions will come from. So this is the one but. The other but, or the other question mark, is the following. Even with the current trajectory of clean energy is about 2 times higher than the fossil energy, the global temperature, the trajectory we are following, will end up with a 2.5 degrees Celsius temperature increase. So we read in the newspapers today, or yesterday, the weekend's papers, there is already a heat wave. It is not an issue of tomorrow, 2030, 2050. Heat wave in North America, heat wave in India, heat wave in Middle East, in Saudi Arabia and elsewhere, and thousands of people lose their lives or being negatively affected. So this is climate change is not an issue of tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, it is the issue of today. So this is the second point that I thought we should be all aware of, that clean energy investments are growing, but not strong enough to avert the climate change implications. And the issue is, the fault line is, it is not enough investment of clean energy in emerging and developing countries. In this context, when we look, what are the major challenges we are facing in terms of emissions? If you ask me if I have to pick up one, I would tell you it is the coal electricity generated emissions. Today, we have about 9,000 coal-fired power plants around the world, and they are only the power plants run by coal. They are responsible about 1/3, almost 1/3 of global emissions. It's a big challenge. And if I go further to make the things more complicated, big chunk of these coal plants are in Asia, in developing countries in Asia. Even more complicated, the average age of those coal plants is 13 years old. They are very young. A coal plant has a lifetime of about 50-55 years. In a normal world, if those coal plants would continue with their normal economic lifetime, then our commitment to 1.5 degrees is literally dead. Leave aside the new plants, coal plants, others, put everything aside. If the existing coal plants continue to operate in line with their economic lifetime, about 40 more years, then you can forget the 1.5 degrees target. So, and to be very frank, emerging countries, when they say, especially those who are coming from the low-income countries, so we are aware that those coal plants are creating problems for the climate change, but we need electricity. And we already paid money there, made the investment. You, rich countries, many years, you use coal plants and this and that, put the emissions in the atmosphere, and now you are telling us to shut down our coal plant whose investment we already paid. We have calculated, ladies and gentlemen, there is, from the coal plants in the emerging world, there is 1 trillion, almost 1 trillion US dollar money to be recovered. So who is going to pay for this money? This is a key issue. And I know that we have a lot of good projects, so-called JETPs, and in many parts of the world, in Indonesia, in Vietnam, South Africa, Senegal, and I really hope that they would run smoothly and meet the demands of the host countries as well as the inspirations of the countries who are financially supporting them. So this is one part of the coal problem. What do we do with the existing coal plants, especially those which are in the emerging and developing countries with low income levels? Because there are some countries in Asia who can, in my view, afford to retire their coal plants earlier. The second issue, which is as our North American colleagues would say, no-brainer issue, is the following: don't build new unabated coal plants. When we look at the numbers, we see that the appetite to build new coal plants is in a dying process. Some countries still do it. For example, I see that there are about 50 gigawatts of new project online for China, a country which is a champion of also clean energy technologies for solar, wind, electric cars, but at the same time, the 50 gigawatts of new coal plants are lined up. But some other countries as well, our numbers show that there is still some appetite in some countries, but it is dying slowly but surely. So we have two jobs as far as the coal is concerned. The one is not to build new unabated coal plant, but the second, the gigantic job is, in my view, what do we do with the existing coal plants in young existing coal plants in the emerging and developing countries in Asia. Now, when I look at the power sector today, to give you a picture where it is, I'm just saying, reporting you the number without any wishful thinking or anything. In the year 2023, last year, of all the new power plants built in the world, in the entire world, 85% renewables, 5% nuclear power, 10% coal, gas, and oil put together. And why renewables are growing so strongly, why they are dominating the game, especially solar? Is it for climate reasons? Absolutely not, because they are cheaper. The same applies to wind, the same applies to other renewable sources. So this is the picture we are seeing when we look at the renewables, and looking at the next 3-4 years, the growth of renewables will continue very strongly across the world. There are some bits and pieces, as I mentioned, on coal and some places on gas, but the renewables will dominate mainly as a result of the economics it is offering. Now, I would finish with two other thoughts, because I get this question a lot. If there is a change in a government in this country or that country, are we seeing that this clean energy transition, moving fast, can be reversed globally? And dear colleagues, my answer is, of course, policies would matter with the speed of the clean energy transition. But I think the current clean energy transition is irreversible because of the dynamics of the economics of them. They are cheaper. Think about solar now. 10 years ago, solar was just a romantic story, and now this is the main choice of many countries. Second, countries are seeing that the future of the industrial sector, manufacturing, lies in the clean energy manufacturing. It is not in the past old obscure industries. They are pushing that as an industrial policy. So both the economics of it, industrial policy pushes, in my view, clean energy transition. And I will be surprised, as a result of the change in governments in this or that country, they would stop the countries, put the solar aside, wind aside, and go and start to build coal-fired power plants. C'est passé, it is over. So therefore, it may have an impact, those policies, changing governments, slowing down, accelerating clean energy transition, but I believe it is irreversible. Finally, as far as coal is concerned, one wish from my side this year, since we have the president of the COP29, who is making a lot of efforts to bring and hear everybody's views, I would be very happy to see that if the new NDCs coming would include no new unabated coal and also early retirements of the existing coal plants within the NDCs. Once again, congratulations to France, UK, and all the other countries putting this issue on the table. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to Dr. Birol for setting out so clearly the urgency of the issue we're looking at today, but also some of the challenges which are being faced, especially in emerging and developing economies. And it's to help solve these challenges that we're convening this set of solutions dialogues. We're going to be co-convening these dialogues with our co-chairs, the governments of the UK and Canada, and also with Bloomberg Philanthropies. Our co-chair, Minister Stephen Guilbault and Mike Bloomberg, were really sorry that they couldn't join us today, but they've sent a short message to welcome us all to the event. So I'd like to invite you all to join me in watching the screen for the short message from Minister Guilbault and from Mike Bloomberg.
Hello, esteemed partners. 7 years ago, we launched a Powering Past Coal Alliance, and I was there. We started with 27 members. Today, we have over 180 members. This collaboration has become the international reference in our global efforts to end our dependency on coal. At COP23, we made a bold commitment. It would not be easy. Coal was central to many communities and energy systems around the world. But we knew that it was necessary to leave the world's dirtiest fuel behind and to scale up more affordable, more efficient, and cleaner options. Our decisions to co-chair this alliance is rooted in our actions back home to end our dependency on coal. Canada was the first country to legislate an end to coal-fired electricity. Since then, we have legislated a commitment to achieve net zero emissions across our economy by 2050. We put a price on carbon pollution, and we're now finalizing clean electricity regulations to help with our transition to a net zero grid. Canada's power grid is already over 84% non-emitting, but by 2050, our demand for electricity is likely to double as sectors electrify and population grows. The clean electricity regulations, backed with major public investments, will enable electricity providers to continue to offer affordable and reliable power to Canadians. This will lay the foundation for other sectors to replace fossil fuels with clean electricity, to make further clean investment as well. And it's working. More and more local governments across Canada are building solar farms and wind farms for communities. And last year, Volkswagen committed to building one of the largest battery factories in the world in St. Thomas, Ontario, because of Canada's ability to supply clean and affordable electricity in the decades ahead. Let me highlight the progress we're all making both locally and globally. In the last year, several countries made significant new phase-out commitments, some despite a significant reliance on coal. The PPCA continues to push for concerted action at the G7, the G20, and COP28. We're committed to help developing countries make the transition to clean power through organizations like the United Nations Southeast Asia Energy Transition Partnership, which Canada is supporting. The PPCA's Solutions Dialogue series bring all of us together, governments, nations, businesses, finance, and community leaders, to increase the momentum. We must keep up this work to build a global clean economy free of coal, and I invite leaders from across the world to join us. This group here is a powerful force for change, working to help to ensure the future health of our planet. Let's keep it growing for our children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. Thank you for the momentum you continue to generate, and thank you especially to all of our partners in the United Kingdom for hosting today's gathering. See you soon.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for everything you're doing to save lives and fight climate change by moving the world beyond coal. At Bloomberg Philanthropies, we've been glad to partner with Powering Past Coal since it first launched. Together with our environmental partners, including many people in the room, we've helped retire more than 70% of U.S. coal plants, and half of Europe's too. More countries are committing to completely phase out coal-fired power plants. The last coal plant in the UK is slated to close later this year. Progress is happening, but not fast enough. Global coal use continues to rise and kill people every day, and it's the single largest contributor to climate change. So we have to do more and move faster to close down our remaining coal plants and stop new ones from opening. Today is a chance to share what's working and exchange the kind of new, innovative ideas that will help us move away from coal for good. Thank you for your leadership and ambition, and keep up the great work. All the best.
Thank you very much to our co-chair and to Mike Bloomberg from Bloomberg Philanthropies. We heard from Dr. Birol that one of the regions that faces the greatest challenge to phasing out coal is Southeast Asia. And we're really pleased to have here with us today one of the regional leaders. The World Economic Forum put Malaysia at the top of their Energy Transition Index last year. That's the index that measures the preparedness and planning for energy transition. And so we're really pleased to have with us today the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Energy for Malaysia, the Right Honourable Dato Sri Haji Fadillah bin Haji Youssef. May I welcome you to the stage.
Thank you very much. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, let me begin by extending my gratitude to the UK government for inviting me to this significant event and granting me the honor to discuss on Malaysia's decarbonisation efforts at this high-level dialogue session, which coincide with the London Climate Action Week. It is encouraging to witness the gathering of key stakeholders here dedicated to finding viable solutions to the world's climate challenges. The first global Stocktake report at COP28 starkly revealed a shortfall in meeting the 1.5 degrees Celsius Paris Agreement goal, which highlights the inadequacy of our current clean energy transition efforts. Henceforth, bringing the emissions gap requires an accelerated shift in our mindset and urgency, which demands a concerted efforts from both developed and developing countries to transition our energy systems. This includes in the decrease of dependency on fossil fuels,
increase in renewable energy infrastructure, investment, and adoption of energy-efficient technologies across all sectors. The theme of this dialogue, Rising Ambition, Accelerating Action, is undoubtedly apt, as it aligns perfectly with Malaysia's commitments on sustainable development by progressively phasing out fossil fuel, which will unlock high-value investment and foster economic growth in clean tech. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Malaysia is committed to achieving net zero emission by 2050, despite the country only contributing to 0.8% of global emissions. However, in recognizing the pivotal role of our collective efforts in mitigating climate change, we are now consciously transitioning away from coal-fired power generation, which currently accounts for nearly half of our national emissions. We are steadfastly ensuring the shift is balanced and equitable in minimizing economic disruption while maintaining stable and reliable energy supply for our people and industries. We have already taken decisive steps, including a bold policy commitment to cease the construction of new coal plants. Moving forward, we have established a clear phase-out plan for existing coal-fired power plants. I'm pleased to inform that by 2035, we aim to reduce our coal-fired power plants to 50% and a complete retirement of all coal-fired power plants by 2044. In our transition efforts, we acknowledge significant social and economic challenges, such as loss of jobs in coal-fired power plants and concern on stranded assets. Therefore, addressing these issues has become our priority, and we are now quickly developing comprehensive reskilling programs to equip workers with skills and competencies to embrace clean tech and the green economy. Simultaneously, we are fostering rapid growth in renewable energy adoption, which presents extensive new opportunities for people and industries alike. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the International Energy Agency and the International Renewable Energy Agency, in their outlook towards 2050 emphasizes that electrification will be pivotal in helping countries decarbonize and reduce carbon emissions. This shift includes electrifying daily activities such as transportation, industrial processes, and manufacturing to green and renewable energy sources. As such, transitioning to a low carbon energy system with clean electricity grids are essential in fostering a sustainable future for humanity. Concurrently, Malaysia is taking decisive steps forward through the National Energy Transition Roadmap, which outlines our aspiration of significantly increasing our national renewable energy target to 70% by 2050 from the current 26%. However, achieving this ambitious target requires aggressive development and investment across various renewable energy sources. While phasing out coal is critical, it is only one facet of the broader challenge and is essential for us to acknowledge that the cost associated with fully replacing its baseload capacity. To tackle this, Malaysia is actively promoting the development and deployment of alternate clean and sustainable energy sources, including solar, biomass, and waste to energy, in aligning with our circular economy approach. We are also aware of the challenges involved in the integration imposed by the increased capacity of the various renewable energy sources and understand the imperative of strengthening and modernizing our grid infrastructure. The effort is crucial to ensure seamless integration and grid stability, which are actively prioritizing in the necessary capital and infrastructure investment to support this transition effectively. Furthermore, Malaysia recently launched the Malaysia Energy Exchange, or ENEGEM, among the world's first green electricity marketplace for cross-border trade, which is an innovative platform that serves a dual purpose of maximizing the value of our expanding renewable energy portfolio and bolstering our national decarbonization efforts through enhanced regional collaboration on clean energy initiatives. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the urgency of the climate crisis demands a global response that transcends borders and ideologies. The evidence is clear, and accelerating our clean energy transition is vital, which Malaysia is fully committed to this endeavor. Our ambitious national targets, along with concrete action, such as the energy platform, underscores our dedication in combating climate change. So in conclusion, I want to reiterate that achieving net zero emission is not a solitary pursuit, but requires our collective efforts from all. We must collaborate to exchange best practices, harness innovative technologies, and ensure an equitable transition that leaves no one behind. Through cooperation, we can forge a future powered by clean energy, ensuring a sustainable and prosperous world for our future generation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that really inspiring overview of Malaysia's plans for the energy transition. We're now going to move straight to another leader who has a really vital role to play in this critical year. We're really pleased that we have with us here today Mukhtar Barbayev, the Minister of Ecology and Natural Resources and COP President Designate.
Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen and friends, thank you for the opportunity to be here at the high-level launch, the Powering Past Coal Solution Dialogue. I would especially like to recognize that Powering Past Coal Alliance and its co-chairs, the United Kingdom and Canada, as well as Bloomberg Philanthropies, Azerbaijan is proud to be a member of this alliance. Thank you for driving this important effort to collect and apply the lessons learned from first movers, global experts, and innovators as we work to tackle unabated coal power. These discussions are essential for sharing best practices, fostering innovation, and identifying effective strategies to accelerate climate action and meet global climate goals. As we develop next round of NDC pathways, we understand that different countries and regions have different starting points. They are all at very different stages in their energy transition journey, and some of them need to be enabled through necessary means of implementation. It is fitting that the first of these dialogues is held here in United Kingdom. Coal was the fuel that powered the Industrial Revolution and greatly contributed to this country's economic growth. But in just a few short months from now, the United Kingdom will no longer use coal to generate electricity. With coal having supplied 40% of this country's electricity only a decade ago, this is one of the fastest energy transitions in the world. This is an inspiring example of ambition translated into action for the countries and the private sector to follow. Battersea power station itself is a shining example of what is possible and the future that we can enjoy without coal. We must continue to push developed nations to make similar transitions, to adopt the energy sources that will fuel the 21st century. This means countries should keep the promises that they have already made and raise their ambitions in transforming their energy mix. The global stocktake calls on parties to accelerate efforts toward the phase-down of unabated coal power in a nationally determined manner. This is essential to achieve the needed deep, rapid, and sustained reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. We have seen signs of progress this year already. We are encouraged by the outcome of the G7 Environmental Ministers meeting, which included an agreement to phase out unabated coal by 2035. The G20 Leaders Summit in November will be another key moment to signal commitment. We expect these advanced economies to commit to move with even greater urgency and focus to advance the transition from unabated coal power generation to clean energy. We will continue working intensively with Brazilian presidency and other delegations to support these efforts. As we push for developed countries to move faster, we must also ensure that the developing world has enough resources, technologies, and capabilities to drive just, equitable, and affordable energy transition pathways. To do that, we must agree a new climate finance goal that is fair and ambitious and address the needs and priorities of developing country parties, so that they are also able to benefit from the opportunities offered by the green transition without disrupting the energy security or economic development that offers their citizens improved quality of life. Meeting the rising energy needs of developing countries and financing their energy transition leapfrog is imperative if we are to meet our global climate targets. In order to achieve these goals, we must finalize Article 6, as this will support us to develop climate-positive business models for activities such as retrofitting existing plants with carbon capture technologies. That's why building on the positive progress at Bonn in relation to Article 6 is a priority for the COP29 presidency. We have worked with Troika partners to ensure the full UN system is deployed to support the parties. UNDP has launched its Climate Promise 2025 initiative to provide capacity building support. The COP29 presidency and the International Energy Agency, in close partnership with UNFCCC, have organized high-level dialogues on how to explore the ways to implement the outcomes of the global stocktake. The second of these dialogues took place just this morning here in London. We also call on financial institutions, including MDBs, to contribute to these life or death efforts. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you again for the invitation to participate in this valuable session. Our challenge is big. Coal still supplies just over a third of global energy generation. We have much to do to support coal-dependent countries in delivering a just transition for workers and communities impacted by the move away from coal. But it is a challenge we must address head-on. We look forward to continuing to partner with you to encourage and enable a move to cleaner energy sources as a critical part of climate action. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Barbet, for setting out such clear ambition. I'd now like to give the floor to the Canadian Climate Ambassador, Catherine Stewart.
Distinguished colleagues, it gives me great pleasure to be here representing Canada as co-chair with the UK to the Powering Past Coal Alliance. And this is the first time I find myself here at the Battersea Power Station, and I have to say I'm absolutely blown away with what I am seeing, and I think it's so inspiring for all of us to be here and see coal become history. And I really want to congratulate the UK who will end power coal generation this fall, moving within just 10 years from coal being 40% of its power generation to zero. I think it's absolutely commendable. I also want to start with other words of inspiration coming from Canada. In Ontario, the Ontario government committed in 2003 to phase out coal by 2014. And at that time, it was 25% of its power generation. And it also at that time represented the largest single GHG reductions in North America. And I'm very pleased to see that that has been accomplished. Also, but more notably, last week, Alberta, province of Alberta, phased out their last coal power plant. And they did this 5 years ahead of time. And at that time, when they announced it, they weren't sure it would be possible. So these are incredible, inspiring things that we all can do. And this alliance represents a very bold commitment to leave coal behind and embrace that cleaner and more sustainable future. We all understand that in order to limit the global temperature increase by 1.5 degrees Celsius and to avert the worst climate crisis, we need to stop building new coal power plants now and completely phase out coal in the OECD and the EU by 2030 and globally by 2040. And last year at COP28, as a global community, we committed to transition away from unabated fossil fuels. And as the G7 recently put coal phase out very firmly on the agenda by committing to phase out unabated coal power in the first half of the 2030s. However, we know this alone is not enough. And we would like to see a decisive commitment by the G20 to phase out coal by 2040. And that would show leadership to accelerate that transition to cleaner, cheaper, more sustainable energy. And as Dr. Birol has said, we know that for many emerging economies, the phase out from coal to clean will not be easy, and it must be delivered in a way that expands access to safe, secure, and affordable energy and safeguards the livelihoods of workers in their communities. It's going to require collective action. It's going to require international cooperation, and it also is going to require unwavering dedication. So this Solutions Dialogue series was designed to help do just that, to bring together all the relevant actors from government, business, finance, and civil society to find those solutions and raise ambition and accelerate actions to phase out unabated coal power and get us on track for 1.5 degrees. We know it can be very difficult to take that step. And as a fossil fuel producing country, Canada knows firsthand the challenges of phasing out unabated coal. But PPC members are and must remain steadfast in following through to action on this commitment. So let's continue to be inspired by others and what they're able to do and continue to support the efforts of the Powering Past Coal Alliance and bringing more members on board to seeing a coal-free future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm really delighted that we have here to bring to a conclusion this opening segment someone who's been a really tireless advocate of this cause. We're really delighted to have here Selwyn Hart, the Special Advisor to the UN Secretary General on Climate Action and Just Transition.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon. And it's a pleasure to be here with all of you. And I want to thank the co-chairs of the Powering Past Coal Alliance, Canada and the UK. I see the French here as well. They've also been an outstanding leader, Bloomberg Philanthropies, and all of the other partners. And I really want to thank you for your continued leadership at this really critical juncture in our fight against the climate crisis. Earlier this month, the Secretary General, he delivered a special address on the state of the climate. And his intention and his rationale for delivering this moment of truth speech was really to ensure that addressing climate remains high on the political agenda of leaders. And the reality is if you're any part of the world, but especially in the developing world, you're seeing the consequences of our continued inaction or insufficient action. Wildfires, floods, droughts, climate extremes are accelerating at an incredible rate. And it is absolutely crucial that the world unites despite the existing global divisions. It is absolutely crucial that the world unites in this fight against the climate crisis. And I definitely share the optimism of my good friend and colleague, Fatih Birol, as well as the COP president. The transition is inevitable. It is absolutely inevitable. Less than 10 years ago, when the Paris Agreement was finalized, we hoped that the transition would happen. But now, 9 years after Paris, it is absolutely clear that despite what happens in any major economy, the transition is inevitable. The only two unanswered questions are, will it be fast enough to prevent a climate catastrophe and to keep the 1.5 degree goal of the Paris Agreement within reach? And the second question is, will it be fair? Right now, the race to net zero is leaving a significant amount of the global population behind. As the IEA has stated categorically in its one of its most recent reports, 85% of the clean energy investment last year, the record near 2 trillion in clean energy investment last year, 85% of that was concentrated in the advanced economies and China. A mere 15% went to countries representing 2/3 of the global population. 15% going to countries representing 2/3 of the global population. And that included India and Brazil and Indonesia, where the clean energy revolution is accelerating. So we have a major challenge. The rest of the world is being left behind. And it will be critical that as we move forward with the work of this alliance and other partnerships, that we find solutions that ensure that countries like Malaysia, and Deputy Prime Minister, I welcome your leadership and I welcome your strong commitment. It is absolutely critical that countries like Malaysia and other countries are not left behind, that they have access to the finance and the technology that they desperately need. And we also need leadership from the G7. You have the power, you have the responsibility, and Catherine, I share your call on the G7, the advanced economies and OECD countries to exit coal by 2030. We need a clear and unambiguous commitment from the G7, from all advanced economies, from all OECD countries to exit coal by 2030 at the latest. The existing commitments do not go far enough. So we at the United Nations, we don't have lots of resources. We don't have any resources. We simply have the voice of the Secretary General, his convening power, and the expertise of the UN system. We will continue to partner with you. We will be a strong, independent partner to the developing countries to help them navigate the difficulties associated and challenges, but also capitalize on the opportunities of a transition that is fair and just, a transition that leaves no one behind. We have our colleagues from the ILO who can help with the labor market modeling. We have our colleagues from UNEP and WMO who can help with the scientific modeling. This is an all-in moment. And the UN remains firmly committed to helping to build trust and to inspire the cooperation that we desperately need to address this challenge of the transition. But again, to our colleagues from the PPCA, We will continue to be a trusted and valuable partner. And these solutions dialogues, they must be a moment where we find practical solutions, country by country, to help these countries accelerate their transition away from coal and fossil fuels to a clean energy future, a future that leaves no one, no developing country, no community, no person in a developing country behind. I thank you.
Thank you. So Selwyn Hart told us that we need to find solutions country by country. We need to work together to overcome some of the challenges. And that's exactly what we're going to start doing in this next session, where we're going to be looking at country commitments and the support they need to raise their ambition. And I'm really pleased that we have with us to moderate this session one of the Alliance's long-term friends and supporters, Ailun Yang, the Head of International Partnerships at Bloomberg Philanthropies. Over to you, Ailun.
I think I have this, is this mic on? Oh, thank you so much. My name is Ailun. I'm with Bloomberg Philanthropies. We are a very proud partner of the Powering Past Coal Alliance from the very beginning. So excited to see this alliance just keep growing. So with me today, we're gonna do two panels. As we say that the phasing out of fossil fuels is inevitable, but countries are at different points of this journey. So we're gonna hear from different countries about their efforts and what they can share with the rest of us. So this first panel, we have Jennifer Morgan. Sorry. Hi, Jennifer. Jennifer Morgan is the State Secretary and the Special Envoy for International Climate Action of Germany. And then we're going to have Rahman from Indonesia, Deputy Minister of Coordinating Ministry for Maritime and International Investment Affairs. Please. Yes? Can we see it? So, Jennifer, let's start with you. Tell us, give us a little bit of an update on where Germany is with the effort to phase out coal.
Well, first of all, congratulations on an amazing venue and an amazing group of people here. So it's wonderful to be here. And actually to be able to report good news from Germany on the coal transition, on the whole energy transition. So you may know we have a goal to, or it's not just a goal, it's a law, to aim to phase out coal by 2030. We're doing pretty well. We've got, we closed, I would say we're on track. So this last year, Q1, we closed 15 coal power units, totaling 4.4 gigawatts. And I think as we know, we need to be doing this all together. So we're also at 58% renewables in our power sector, in our electricity sector. And our solar PV auctions are doing excellent. They're oversubscribed by a factor of 2 to 3. And we have 400,000 people working in renewable energy. And I think a key on the coal phase out has been the just transition that we've been putting in place for some time. The last government actually had called in a coal, or created a coal commission, which had a range of different players on it, from NGOs and scientists to local states to businesses, on a coal commission that came up with a recommendation, and now we've put that in law, and we're moving forward.
Great. Let's turn to Rahman. So every time when people talk about Indonesia's effort to phase out coal, people normally zoom in on JP, the Just Energy Transition Partnership. But we know JP is just a part of the country's effort for energy transition. Do you want to share a little bit of your efforts in general and the role of JP in it?
Yeah, thank you, Alan. Maybe unlike Ambassador Morgan here, maybe for us, we are on the other side of the spectrum. We are still in developing economy. And basically, we are starting our energy transition. Today, if you look at Indonesian energy use, primary across all sectors, more than 80% is still using fossil. Yeah, and about 3/4 of those is actually only three things: coal for electricity, fuel, oil for transport, and then another coal for industrial heat. And of course, each one of these is basically require different effort. Right? For electricity, which is about 40% of our energy use, Indonesia today are still using relatively small amount of power per capita, maybe about 1,200 kilowatt hours per capita. And as Indonesian economy growing, I think basically we know that the demand of electricity is going to go up. So the strategy for Indonesia is actually to ensure as much as this new demand is supplied by renewables. So I think that is the goal here, as well as we need to think about how can we limit new coal in the grid, right? So that is already embedded in our presidential regulation. So in 2022, just before we partner in JETP, our president has issued presidential regulation and on basically renewables. And one of the things, the key things is how do we look at coal electricity? And this basically three things. One, our state grid, PLN, should not buy more or build more coal-fired power plants, with the exception of the one that is already contracted. Obviously, because we are, sovereign, canceling contracts will be very, very difficult for us, with the exception, of course, if the IPPs want to cancel, and I think we'll be quite happy to engage. So far, nobody have come to us and said, you want to cancel. So that is the problem. But I think we're going to stop beyond what is already in the pipeline. And then on the non-grid, because Indonesia typically, Indonesia have 17,500 islands. Some of these needs are not connected to the grid. We already have a limitation that if they were to build, they have to stop using coal-fired by 2050. Our NDC is 2060 or faster. So 2050, they have to stop. So I don't think anybody is going to build coal-fired power plant by 2049, for example. So they're going to probably stop at 2030, the maximum is the peaking. And if they build coal-fired power plants, they have to reduce the emission per kilowatt hour by 35% within 10 years of their operation. And then, to be honest, we provide all these boundaries because it's quite interesting case study that, you want to try to do transition while your economy is still growing, your demand is still growing. So that is the effort, especially, and of course we do other energy transition in the transport sector, which is quite large, and we import oil, we do electrification. Now, related to JETP, which is focusing on the electricity sector, basically today, the discussion and the work that has been done initially focus on creating the roadmap, right? So that is already, we already completed that. I think as the ball currently is in our court in Indonesian government to update our long-term generation plan to embed more renewables. And then, of course, we also need to make sure that the support or financing commitment is also quite aligned with the plan. So we need to make sure that the projects that we are created can have the technology as well as financing and the policy that that is suitable to implement. So we are actually in the execution mode in JETP.
Thank you for the update. Jennifer, Germany actually played a very active role in the establishment of Indonesia's JP. So could you share what you have learned in this type of multilateral partnership?
I mean, first of all, I think congratulations to Indonesia for stepping into this space at all. It was an unusual kind of new way of working that we had tried with, worked on with South Africa. and the idea to try and pull together various countries that you had been working with in a way that was more efficient, that also you owned, that Indonesia owned your country plan, your investment plan. And I think it's great to be testing out new ways of doing things together, because we know what we've been doing thus far hasn't been adequate. So, and obviously you're at a very different stage than a Germany is. And I think we've learned a bunch of lessons. I think partially is the importance of the high-level engagement. You know, this was something that was discussed by both of our leaders early on, with a sense of, okay, what could this be looking like? And I think that regular engagement was key, and the G20 presidency of Indonesia was very important on that. I think having that kind of preparatory time period was quite important, and getting the analysis in place. What are we looking at? And here I think we could have been even better. We all kind of looked back afterwards and saw, well, there was actually an issue of captive coal that we only discovered later. So really take the time to do the analysis early on, so that you have a good sense, or the country has a good sense of what's there, because you know things can always come up. So don't rush that. And I think also, so you can get the numbers right and that piece, having the policy in place, as you mentioned, also very key. So long, loud legal policies on renewables, on efficiency, on the actual transition plan. And last but certainly not least is actually the engagement of stakeholders. And here I think we can do better than what we've done in our JETPs thus far. I'll speak from our perspective. I don't know how you see that, but you had great, I mean, we all had experts involved, but I think these are such fundamental issues that go into communities. And so having a strong public participation kind of process, and even stronger, I think is quite important. And then I guess the last piece is, and this is maybe more from the German experience that we have had right now, and just coming back from yesterday, coming in from Beijing, you know, we're really in the midst of creating a different kind of energy system. And so stepping back and really looking at that, because I think we have to embrace that the ways of producing and consuming energy are fundamentally changing. And we're like the centralized and base load model, I think, is yesterday. At least in Germany, it's yesterday. And the future is really smart and flexible. So that's how you also can be working on storage. You know, that's a big part of our storage. And we have days that are 100% renewables in Germany, or have such high level of renewables. We have to deal with the storage thing, but having that flexible grid, solar with storage, rather than thinking, okay, we need to have these big power plants being in one from the past, and that's going to be our base load. And then the last thing I think is really to see how renewables, at least I can speak for Germany, it is our energy security strategy. And it is the way that we're driving down prices, because I think there's this sense we need to bring down the cost of capital, get the investment in, so that it's affordable in countries. But I think if you're looking at the direction of travel, that's really the way to go. So it's been a great pleasure working with Indonesia. I had a great joy of coming in. I think I met 7 of your ministers on one of my first trips as special envoy, and appreciate the commitment and look forward to continuing it.
Rahman, anything to add?
Yeah, thank you, Ambassador. So basically, first of all, at the time when we thinking about JETP, we have a choice to engage or not, right? And I think Indonesia, given our position in G20 as a president at the time, and one of the large country that is developing, I think we choose to engage, even though maybe sometimes it's quite painful, right? Because the discussion is not easy. And of course, the problem is not easy. So we decided, let's do this, and hopefully everybody can learn. Obviously, if we were to look back, and if we can redo it again, I want to echo Ambassador Morgan. I think initially we are, like, you know, we have a deadline. At the time was in G20. And initially we talk very general terms, and then towards the end, we try to put a number with the number that is available. We know at that time that number, at least from our side, was not perfect, but that is what we have, right? And then as a result, there's a lot of discussion spent to see whether that number is appropriate or not. So maybe next time for people to have this collaboration is actually we start with the technical first. We need to sit down and see, like, engage with all the technical people to see what is possible, what is the transition in this country looks like properly. And then, of course, you want to do transition, basically you need three things. One is policy. Two, you need the technology. And then the third one, you need the financing, right? I think on the policy side, for Indonesia, there is a lot of these things that maybe legacy policy, local content requirement, for example, it took us some time. Even we are still working on it. Hopefully by next month, we can solve it. I promise Alexia, this month I'm gonna miss maybe my promise by a few weeks, but I think it's coming. For example, how can we ensure that the industry grows as well as, but the investment also can be executed. But also what we need to remember is that just our fair energy transition, all in all, is about job creation as well. So I think that is something that we haven't really touched. We do a lot of it, just like, assessment, maybe think about community, but it doesn't have to be green jobs. It has to be jobs, right? Because for Indonesia that have millions of people in the coal industry, it's very difficult for us to just say, oh, don't use coal. It's like basically telling people you cannot eat tomorrow, right? So we need to find a replacement for this one. And I think that support can be improved moving forward. And of course, for the other developing nations, that is going to be their big issue as well. On the technology, I think it's relatively straightforward. We just need to have that accessible. The smart grid, the transmission. What I want to also add is the technology to generate power itself, I think need to be shared. Because for Indonesia, currently we are an energy exporting country, even though fossil, right? I think it'll be very difficult for us not to have the renewable industry in the country and become like, energy importing or dependent for other countries. For energy security purpose, I think it's quite important. So I think we are trying to partner with a lot of people to try to build the renewable supply chain in the country, plus also learning how to do smart grid like transmission. But maybe this is related to financing and also policy. We do have this legacy problem on fixed contracts for fossil. Typically, maybe because when we set up our power purchase agreement, Indonesia is probably just on the back of Asian financial crisis. We have very strong contract that is fixed. For example, take or pay 80%, which is very difficult if you want to, embed more variable renewable energy in the country. So maybe moving forward for the International Finance Organization, maybe ask later on to have smaller take or pay and have more flexible contract. I think that is quite important. And then maybe lastly in the financing, maybe two things. Yeah, one, how can we make sure that this carbon people should not be, because carbon budget is a global public goods, people should not be punished from their geography or from their country credit rating, right? Some projects ideally should be funded or should get financing based on the rating of their carbon reduction or carbon avoidance. So how can we do that? I think in Paris in February, we discussed a little bit about maybe we need a green Bretton Woods. If it's a very good project, maybe we give them good rating and then they can get good financing. And of course, last but not least, maybe another way to do that beyond credit rating is also, or carbon rating maybe, is also how can we compensate on the, let's say, the carbon market, the carbon credit. For example, if let's say we shut down our coal-fired power plant, can we actually sell the carbon credit? That could possibly will help abate the cost of power plants that is currently not still unpaid for. Like in Indonesia, our coal-fired power plants on average is still 13 years of age. So canceling that or retiring that definitely will destroy financial value, and the benefit is going to be shared by everybody. Can we also think about a way to compensate that? Maybe that's what I learned. Thank you.
Thank you. A lot of really valuable lessons. Thank you so much. And I think the most important message is really we're in this together. Thank you for your time. I think we will now welcome the next panel. So for the next panel, we will have Ambassador Jimena Fuertes, Chilean ambassador to the UK. Please. We also have Ms. Gwen Tanaska, Managing Director for Clean Energy from the US State Department. And last we have Mr. Mustafa Gue, Director of International Labour Organization Action Program on Just Transition. Welcome. So, Ambassador, let's start with you. So, Chile is really a regional leader in terms of phasing out coal. Could you share what actions or policy measures that you think really make the biggest difference in your country?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. It is an honor for me to be here today, speaking about progress that Chile has made in this transition towards green energy. I would like to first highlight that Chile, we are a small country, but we have been very, very successful in implementing a long-term energy transition policy that aims to achieve the net zero goal by 2050. Now, the long-term energy policy establishes that by 2050, Chile should rely 100% on zero-emission energy. By 2030, we should have reached 80% at least of the renewables goal. And today, solar and wind energy contribute 35% to the total energy generated during the first quarter of 2024. Now, all this, first, is embedded in legislation. So Chile's national determined contribution is already included as a commitment in the 2022 climate change law. Very early, Chile was aware of the fact that to move forward in its efforts to achieve this net zero goal, we needed a public-private understanding. And this is so because 100% of the electric sector in Chile is private, so it is entirely private. 2018, we initiated a process to reach this private-public agreement, and we were successful. So in 2019, we have an agreement in place between the government and the main energy companies. And this agreement is still in place. So it has been followed by different governments of different political color, and it has exceeded our expectations. So today, 11 coal-fired units have been retired, 11 out of 28. During 2025, 4 more units will be retired. And by the end of 2026, 70% of the installed coal-fired capacity would have been eliminated. Together with this, we have triggered the necessary technological transformations that Chile needs in order to reach this net zero goal. At present, the Ministry of Energy is elaborating a decarbonization plan, which includes an action plan and concrete measures that will enable the operation of the electricity grid without coal before 2040. Therefore, I think that it is a mix of policy, of technological measures, of political agreements, and also of some opportunities that we have. We have many comparative advantages in green hydrogen, in solar and wind. So we are taking advantages from that, and that's why I think we have been very successful. Thank you.
Thank you, truly impressive. I think consistency, thank you for highlighting the importance of policy consistency. Next, can we have Gwen introduce the US experience, both in terms of domestic efforts and also international?
Sure, thanks Eileen. And yes, the United States was very proud to join the alliance at COP28. And I would like to thank, in particular, Canada and the UK for your leadership on this issue. So with respect to the energy transition in the United States, we do recognize the need to phase out coal sort of first and fastest in order to achieve our goal of 100% clean electricity by 2035. So to your question, where we are now, the United States has not built a new coal plant in more than a decade. We're now actually at a point where we have reduced our coal-fired generation by more than half since its peak. And we do expect this trend to continue, right? This shift from coal to clean energy. Part of this is through our Inflation Reduction Act, which was the largest investment in clean energy in US history. But part of it also is that we now have new rules. So actually just this past April, our Environmental Protection Agency, our EPA, announced a final rule that would really ensure that any coal plant that plans to operate in the long term controls 90% of its carbon pollution. So through this rule and others, we do expect that emissions curve to continue falling for the US power sector. Throughout all this, though, I just wanted to underline that President Biden is really committed to a just transition at home. We are working in partnership with energy communities to ensure good paying jobs, to ensure economic revitalization, and really to secure the benefits that energy workers have earned. Thanks.
You want to add anything about US effort globally?
Sure. There are a couple things I would say there. Some of them I might say for the final round. One thing, though, to mention is that the U.S. was proud in the G7 to commit for the first time to phase out existing coal generation. So we hope that that is one near-term harbinger of future progress.
Great, thank you. Last speaker we have does not represent a country, but the topic you work on really is very consistent in every effort to phase out coal. So Mustaf, do you want to introduce a little bit of your work on just transition?
Well, thank you. I think Dr. Birol started this morning and this afternoon reminding us of the heat waves that we see around the world. And I wanted to add to what he has said that just in April, the ILO released a new global assessment which indicates that 2.4 billion workers, that's 70% of the total workforce, is going to be subject to heat wave and heat stress. So, which means that in the world of work, decarbonization is, as Dr. Birol said, is a no-brainer. The future has to be one in a decarbonized economy, one where we phase out of coal. Now the question is that, can this political ambition be based only on numerical targets, or does it have to also address the human dimension of it? We fundamentally believe that ambition is about people. We need to have workers that are able to build new skills to get out of coal and the fossil fuel industry altogether and move into the green economy. And there we talk about jobs altogether, not only a tiny part of green jobs as such. We need to have enterprises that have the means to innovate, invest and develop new business models in the clean energy space. And we need to have communities that are able to decarbonize. So most of our work is about that social dimension of the ecological and the energy transition. Now, what is very important is that in its last assessment report, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has put a message which is very important, which is that social justice, just transition, the equity dimensions, which we used to think of at the end of the process. We would focus on mitigation, adaptation, and at the end of it, there might be health benefits, job benefits. What the IPCC says in the last assessment report is that these social dimensions, they are in fact enablers of ambition, both for mitigation and adaptation. So therefore they come up front. So which means that they must be part of the policy package, the investment package to move out of coal and to decarbonize. So there are many elements to it, not only investment, but the skills, we can talk about it later, but the social dimensions. We've heard from the State Secretary of Germany speaking about this social, the participation of people, the unions, and their representatives, and business and their representatives. So that is really what our work is about.
Thank you. So how to minimize the impact of this transition on coal-dependent communities is really a challenge, but also an opportunity. So the last round, I will ask a question, but want brief answers from each of the panelists. Want to come back to the mission of PPCA. PPCA aims to phase out coal for OECD countries by 2030 and for the rest of the world by 2040. That's a very ambitious goal. And I just want to ask my panelists, are you optimistic that we can achieve these goals and why? Maybe we start with Ambassador.
Well, in the case of Chile, and I think many other countries that we have heard today, in the morning and the afternoon, I think that there are many reasons to be optimistic. First, I think that many countries have already established legal regulation that will help moving forward towards net zero. Also, I see that the investment and the financing world is moving towards green energy. And in fact, in Chile, we have been able to develop plans to foster investment in solar, in wind, in green hydrogen. I think that, as many have already said, there is no way back. Therefore, everyone is adapting. We are using mainly, as we are a developing country, we are using taxation. So we have a green tax, and also we have a compensatory system in order for companies, businesses, to move towards green energy. And most recently, in 2023, we launched an action plan for green hydrogen. We think we are really, really strong in green hydrogen, and this involves a number of economic, financial measures. We have enhanced economic promotion of instruments with a focus on green hydrogen. We have tax credits. We have a tax incentive for research and development. So I think that even coming from a small economy, there are a number of ways in which governments may promote the move towards net zero.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I will offer maybe one or two reasons for optimism. And before I get there, though, really just wanted to make the point that when we're thinking about coal phase out, it is helpful to take sort of a wide lens, right? So this includes moratoria on new unabated coal plants. It includes the expansion of renewables. It includes repurposing existing plants for operational flexibility, right, as more and more renewables come online. It includes early retirements. So I think I would just encourage us to take sort of a holistic view when we're talking about coal phase out, rather than focusing on any single element. To your question, reasons for optimism, I did just want to point out that we do have a major opportunity coming up in the next UN Climate Summit. And it is a good moment to have that conversation, because we're right now sort of exactly at the midpoint between COP28 and COP29. COP28 was legitimately historic. It sort of set a direction of travel. It laid out a roadmap to keep 1.5 degrees within reach, including setting the new goal for tripling renewable energy by 2030. So maybe just 2 points that I would make here. First of all, as we're preparing for COP29, it is a really important year for implementation, right? We really have to work hard to make some of those goals real. And part of that is focusing on the enablers, right? So we know we need to increase energy storage to 1,500 gigawatts by 2030. We need to expand transmission and distribution lines to 100 million kilometers by the same year, et cetera. But also, and this is the second point, we really can't focus on the expansion of renewables alone. A key part, actually, of the pledge to triple renewable energy, which is very often overlooked, unfortunately, is actually this provision in which we recognize the importance of stopping new unabated coal, right, which is completely inconsistent with 1.5. So as we're preparing for the next UN Climate Summit, I think I would just encourage us to consider commitments in that area on ending unabated coal. Thanks.
Thank you. Mustafa.
Well, from my perspective, there are two reasons for optimism. One is that we are starting to see that sort of policy alignment where the policies to phase out coal also involve actors in the real economy in the policy-making space. So for example, last year at the COP28, for the first time, the US Department of Labor attended a COP. So that way of having actors in the real economy, governments, unions, and businesses work around the policy is giving a reason for optimism. The second is that we now start to see programs like the Jet Energy Transition Partnerships have a stronger dimension on the social aspect. So we work on the IkiJet project in Indonesia. It's a German and EU-funded program where we work in Indonesia and also engaging in South Africa. But in both fronts, there is this need for skills, the need for social dialogue, the role of social security in the phase out from coal is being recognized. I think that policy alignment and the way actors in the real economy are coming together is giving us a reason for optimism.
Thank you. So 3-2-0. I think optimism definitely wins today. Well, thank you. Please join me in thanking our panelists. Thank you.
What a great panel, and what a great way to end with reasons for optimism. I feel a lot more optimistic now about the transition. But I think we've heard today that although the transition is inevitable, we're not yet on track for 1.5 degrees, and that there are significant challenges to be overcome, particularly in terms of financing the managed phase-out, finding finance for the transition away from coal-fired plants. We heard from Dr. Birol that we're looking for 1 trillion of assets which are currently invested in young coal plants in Asia. So that's what we're going to focus on in our next session. We're going to be looking at how do we mobilize finance for an accelerated transition. And to lead us through this session, I'm really pleased that we have with us one of the people who's really working hard in this area to drive change. It's great to have with us Alice Carr, the Executive Director of Public Policy at GFANZ.
I don't know whether this is this on? Yeah, okay, great. So I'm only going to be here briefly because we've got three really excellent speakers to kick off this session, all of whom have been working really hard to make sure that where finance is needed for transition, it can flow. And so I want to start by inviting Ambassador Ravi Menon, who is Singapore's Ambassador for Climate Action, to the stage, and in so doing, to thank him for his leadership over recent years on this important topic of coal transition. In particular, he's led our GFANZ APAC network, which over several years worked to produce guidance for the financial system so that financial firms can play a problem-solving role on coal and can support managed phase-out. Thank you, Ravi.
Let me start with the problem statement, and it's simply this. The world will not reach net zero without accelerating Asia's transition from coal to clean. Why? Well, first, 1 out of every 6 tons of greenhouse gas emissions emitted into the atmosphere comes from a coal plant somewhere in Asia. Second, and this is more worrying, if these coal plants are allowed to operate as planned, they will exhaust 2/3 of the remaining budget that we have to keep the rise in global temperatures to within 1.5 degrees Celsius. So even if you assume all the new energy demand in Asia is met by renewables, the mere fact that these coal plants, existing ones, have 20, 30, 40 years more to run, is going to exhaust 2/3 of the budget. So that is why this is a problem. Now the solution is not simple. There are 3 big challenges. First, as I said, the coal plants in Asia are young, about 15 years on average. There's little economic incentive to shut them down. Second, these coal plants today account for 60% of power generation in Asia. 60%, that's not small. And third, new coal plants are being built, as I said, even as renewables are being ramped up across Asia. China has put in place more renewable capacity in recent years than the rest of the world combined. And yet China has found it necessary to build new coal plants because energy demand is rising so rapidly. Same story in Indonesia, same story in India, many other parts of Asia. So the rise in energy demand is a key challenge that needs to be met. And to put things in perspective, some 150 million people in Asia still do not have access to electricity. So to get coal phase out right, we need to get it right in Asia because that's where the problems are most acute. And if we can solve those, then we'll make the most progress. And I thought it's important that we start with these key challenges in mind so that we can be clear-headed about the solutions. And the solution is not about divesting away from coal, but it is about investing in the early phase out of coal. So we need to adjust this narrative. Simply divesting away from coal is going to leave these coal plants still there. So we need to actually invest in their early phase out and get the economics right for doing so. It's about investing in renewable energy, as you know. It is also about investing in grid infrastructure because you need storage capacities and capabilities to deal with the intermittency in renewable energy. And you also need transmission lines to bring electricity produced by renewables in places where there is sunshine or wind to the population centers where there is no sunshine or wind. And so transmission lines are a key part of this equation and often ignored and underappreciated. And to do this, we must take a just transition approach because the coal plants are a vital part of the ecosystem in many countries in Asia. There are 6.7 million people who are employed in the coal value chain across Asia. So even as you phase out of coal, we need a solution for these 6.7 million people and their communities. So we need to take an ecosystem approach, and I'll list just 4 items briefly we need to get right, and we need to get right in synergy. Policy commitment, transition pathways, blended finance, carbon credits. Policy commitment to foster investor confidence in phase-out projects. You need carbon pricing through the use of either carbon taxes or emissions cap and trade systems. And the removal of fossil fuel subsidies, or at least a plan to remove them gradually over time. That will give investors more confidence. You need targets for renewable energy and transition pathways to get there. You need supportive policies for electrification in carbon-intensive sectors such as transport, building, construction, industry. So that's policy commitment. Those are things we need to be in place to bring down the cost of capital. Second, you need credible energy transition pathways. Now, we need the pathways for the energy sector to be contextualized for Asia. The pathway that worked in Europe and America may not be applicable to developing countries in Asia. So that pathway needs to be contextualized for Asia's energy needs. At the same time, the end goal is non-negotiable. We still need to get to net zero by 2050. So same goal, but a different trajectory. Third, we need blended finance to reduce the cost of capital for coal phase out. Cost of capital for energy transition projects in Asia is about 2 to 3 times higher than in America and Europe. And for good reason, because the risks are higher, so the cost of capital needs to be higher. Blended finance can help to reduce the cost of capital in 2 ways. One, it uses concessional capital from public and philanthropic sectors to reduce the risk, to take first loss, and thereby crowd in multiples of private commercial capital. Because otherwise the economics will not work out. And the best use of public capital is to help de-risk or reduce the risk on these projects to draw in many multiples of private capital. That's a much more effective use of public capital and philanthropic capital. And blended finance brings together technical assistance, institutional support, which can help to reduce project risk. But blended finance is not new. There are structures out there, but they need to move away from bespoke deal-by-deal solutions to something that's programmatic and platform approach. So Singapore has established a $5 billion blended finance platform. We call it Financing Asia's Transition, or FAST-P. And we've been working with like-minded partners, sovereigns, multilaterals, development financial institutions, and others to put together a layer of catalytic capital. And we've been talking to others to bring in commercial capital. You need some degree of loss-absorbing equity capital before you can bring in commercial capital in a large way. And as part of FAST-P, Singapore is partnering the Asian Development Bank and the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet to accelerate energy transition in Asia. The last ingredient we need to get right, carbon credits. This is the way we can enhance the economic viability of coal phase out. Because the early retirement of coal plants, which are backed by solid PPAs running for another 30 years, is that there will be a loss of revenue for the plant owners and their financiers, those who bankroll them. If we can generate high integrity carbon credits that can be accurately measured and verified from the future emissions reductions from the early retirement of the coal plant, then the revenue from selling these credits could go some way towards providing the plant owners the necessary incentive. So the incentive structure rests a lot on having a vibrant and high integrity transition credit mechanism. MES worked with the McKinsey, published a paper on such high integrity carbon credits to do this well. So let me conclude. Phasing out coal is the single most important action we can take to stop global warming. But it's not going to be easy. We need to get all the pieces right. And the 4 pieces are energy policies and commitments, transition pathways, blended finance, and carbon credits. And there's work undergoing on all 3 fronts, but we need to do a much better job of synergizing them because we have very little time to lose. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Ravi, for setting out such a clear agenda for us to take forward. And now it gives me great pleasure to invite Kevin Magron, the climate envoy for France to the stage. And I must say that the French government obviously is showing leadership in many different areas, internationally and domestically. But we're very grateful for their efforts on this topic, informed by their Paris Pact for People and the Planet, which both sets high ambition for transition, but also recognizes that this has to be a collaborative effort. So Kevin, please come to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alice, and thank you to PPCA Secretariat and PPCA team for bringing such a great crowd today. They've shown great leadership and you too, Alice, for this work in the last few months and years. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, very honored to be here and represent France today and to be part of this great event. As you know, coal phase-out is the priority for the French government, and so I want to make 5 brief points today about it. First, coal phase-out is not an option. So indeed, in the last COP28, we had a great GST decision, and inside of it, we all decided collectively to phase out fossil fuels, including coal, obviously. We also renewed our objective on tripling renewable energies by 2030, and this is an important commitment we take that will bring us on track for 1.5 degrees, and now is the time of implementation. It must come with concrete and accelerated action on coal phase-out, which has so far been insufficient, and as Fatih Birol said, coal still accounts for 40% of emission globally, and more coal per generation is being added than retired. So this, however, brings many challenges, and I think many guests alluded to it, including the financial one, the main one, obviously. This is not to say that transitioning away from coal is easy, quite the contrary, and we have heard many of our friends, including my friend Rahmat Kaimuddin from Indonesia expressing all the hurdles on this way, from energy security for coal-reliant communities. The issue of coal phase-out is also a financing one, considering that transitioning away at the pace required to meet the Paris goal would cost about 2 trillion according to estimates. So what do we try to do about it? You recall, Alice, the 4P, the Paris Pact for People on the Planet, and also another initiative taken by President Macron, the CTA, the Coal Transition Accelerator, and these are the solutions we try to put forward. Because the question is how to unlock financing at the required pace. And our approach is a very practical one that we want to put in place with our partners, building on the principle of the Paris Pact, that no country should have to choose between fighting poverty and fighting climate change. And we need a great financial shock to assist developing and emerging economies in their transition, and the private capital within it needs to play a key role. I think Fatih alluded already on this topic. And this is why President Macron launched the Coal Transition Accelerator at last COP with our UK friends, Canada's leadership, the PPCA obviously, and Prime Minister of Vietnam, and also Malaysian Minister of Environmental Sustainability. So Deputy Prime Minister, thank you again for your leadership and the leadership of Malaysia on this issue. And I hope Malaysia can join PPCA at a later stage also, and very soon, hopefully. And thank you, GFENS and Bloomberg, for showing so much determination. The CTA puts a strong emphasis on finance across 3 different pillars. The first one is to accelerate the transition to renewable and to decrease the cost of capital, and I think Ambassador Menon just spoke quite eloquently about the different things that we need to unlock for more investment in clean energies in emerging economy. Because it's not going to retire without deploying more renewable at scale. The second pillar, and I'm very glad to say Indonesia is co-chairing also with us this pillar, is the Coal Transition Commission that brings together advanced and emerging economies as well as private and public entities to work on transition finance. And I think this morning at the IEA dialogue, Baroness Vardera talked about this transition finance architecture that we need to structure in order to come out with solutions on how to best finance repurposing, early retirement, and everything that was already mentioned by previous speaker today. Finally, there is a very important one going on at the OECD to establish a gold standard to measure the risk attached to investment in coal. It's a sort of no new coal exclusion policy standard, if you like, very important, because we need the private sector to shift investment towards clean energy away from coal. And this is very important. The CTA was built over existing initiatives and solutions and is committing to using these three pillars to go forwards. And we see a momentum already growing, building on experience from multilateral development banks, especially in Asia, of course, market-based finance, as well as the just energy transition partnerships in the countries that we already mentioned. Let me finish with a more political point, because we spoke a lot about finance, we spoke a lot about the economy. I'm not an economist or a financist, I'm a diplomat by a profession. And I think what we need is actually to strengthen the fact that coal phase out is an opportunity. It's an opportunity, and that has to be brought in political visions, by political commitment, of course, but also by the leaders to bring a desirable future. And what better example we have today in this location to show what it can bring to people also, and job generation that you talked about, Rahmat, is so important in the just transition, but we can see what it can bring also to the communities. So therefore, I'm hopeful that we can, in this path on transitioning away from coal, at the pace needed to achieve 1.5, also demonstrate leadership and a little bit of hope for the societies and the people. And also, for it to be right, we need to, as Fatih Birol said, inform the next NDCs and the next round of NDCs with coal phase-out national plans, targets, and actions at national level. We tried to put that in the last G7 declaration. It's hard work for all our countries. In France, we'll phase out coal by 2027. We have only 2 plants left. But we try to accelerate, and we tried to help others to accelerate. But we have to show that determination also inside the next NDC round. Just to finish, I think today's solution dialogue series and the CTAs are very great examples of the momentum on this. The fact that we have today Malaysia, Indonesia, other very coal-dependent countries, showing that we can bring this dialogue between developed nations, developing countries, and find the appropriate financing mechanism to phase out coal as soon as possible. I thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. And so we have one more introductory speaker, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce my boss, Mary Shapiro, who is Vice Chair of GFANZ. Many of you will know Mary. She's been working for over a decade tirelessly to bring the power of markets to find solutions to climate transition, and that includes on accelerating coal to clean transition. So thank you, Mary.
Thank you, Alice. You are an amazing colleague. It's a real honor to be here today. Thank you all. As recognized by the parties at COP28, accelerating the transition from coal to renewables is essential to keeping the goals of Paris alive. Done in the right way, the early retirement of coal will reduce billions of tons of emissions, boost public health, and improve access to affordable and sustainable energy. Replacing coal with renewables will enable countries and consumers to benefit from the low and falling cost of renewable energy generation. But while use of coal power has been in decline in advanced economies in recent years, it continues to grow in emerging markets. As Ravi said, the 2,200 gigawatts of coal power in operation globally could exhaust 2/3 of the carbon budget if it continues to operate to the end of its economic life. 2023 saw the lowest level of coal retirement in a decade. A key challenge for some emerging markets is that young coal plants with long-term contractual arrangements are locked in, meaning the benefits of ever more competitive renewables generation won't displace coal power on the timeline that the carbon budget demands. The IEA has identified that $1 trillion of capital is locked in coal plants with many years left to operate. Tackling this challenge will require bold action by emerging market governments to shape and implement energy transition plans. But it is clear that the scale of the challenge means governments need support from a wide range of stakeholders. Governments, energy system operators, energy companies, MDBs, private financial institutions, philanthropy, and community groups must work together. The Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, or GFANZ, is working to ensure that private finance plays its part in tackling this challenge. Through work done by our Asia Pacific Network, which was led by Ravi, we have considered how innovative transactions designed to bring forward the retirement date of coal plants could work, and have developed voluntary guidance on what factors firms should consider in ensuring that these transactions are credible, financially viable, and just. So while many net zero committed financial institutions have independently decided to pivot finance away from coal and towards renewables, a growing number are also updating their individual energy policies to confirm that their institution will support credible and ambitious plans for the managed phase-out of coal power. Still, it is early days for these transactions, and to keep the Paris Agreement alive, efforts need to scale rapidly. What sorts of issues can the panel and the important work being taken forward by the Coal Transition Commission address? Well, there is the catalytic public finance, which is being put to work in support of a number of coal-to-clean transitions, including the Indonesian JETP. But we will likely need to scale this finance and remain laser-focused on using it catalytically to support effective private capital mobilization. We see a growing number of MDBs and private financial institutions working to support countries and transactions designed to accelerate coal transitions, but public and private financing partners can be constrained by concerns from shareholders and regulators about what good looks like in relation to transactions that involve going actively to where the emissions are and managing them down more speedily over time. And we need to tap wider sources of finance that include everything from philanthropy to market-based financing, including coal-to-clean carbon credits. Shortening the economic life of a coal power plant, which is otherwise protected by a long-term contract, implies making good the shortfall in revenues. In some early transactions, public finance provided via multilateral development banks is currently doing this heavy lifting. But with over 5,000 coal plants in Asia alone, public finance won't be sufficient to mainstream phase-out plans at the necessary scale. We need something additional to fill the viability gap. Our modeling shows that carbon credits that generate revenue of around $15 per ton of expected emissions reductions could be sufficient to address the costs associated with shortening the life of an average coal plant in APAC. So we're heartened by progress being made to ensure that carbon credits of all stripes are underpinned by high integrity supply and demand standards, and more specifically, the work by a number of initiatives to develop the necessary methodologies for these new credit types. In closing, we would welcome the chance to intensify our work with partners in this room and beyond to ensure that finance is there for high ambition emerging markets and developing economies that want to accelerate their coal transitions. Those that move early, supported by a compelling national coal to clean transition plan that helps guard against risks such as moral hazard and leakage, stand to gain. Their air will be cleaner. The investment in new, clean, reliably cheap energy will support local jobs and growth. Their role in new low-carbon global supply chains will be assured, and new comparative advantages developed. That is a prize worth having, and we will work hard to support you in securing that outcome. Thank you.
Great. And now we have an excellent panel to drill down into the issues that were highlighted by our speakers. So I'd like to welcome John Merton, Senior Sustainability Advisor at Standard Chartered, to the stage, Mathilde Mesnard, Deputy Director and OECD Coordinator for Climate and Green Finance, and Harry Boyd Carpenter, Managing Director for Climate Strategy and Delivery at the EBRD. Thank you. There we are. Excellent. So I've got this really excellent panel here and no time to waste. So I'm going to kick off and I'm going to begin with Mathilde, who, as mentioned, is a Deputy Director at the OECD. Now, Mathilde, the OECD does really important work with a broad set of countries, both members and beyond. And I wanted to start by asking you what you see as the key opportunities and challenges in the coal to clean transition, and how the OECD is supporting countries with advice on acceleration. And just to add to that, what are the key levers, policy levers that we should pull here? Thanks.
Thank you, Alice. So clearly, I mean, a lot has been said already, so I'm afraid to repeat a lot of elements that my predecessors mentioned, but let me do it nevertheless. So clearly, if we want to get where we want to get in terms of climate change, etc., we have two big challenges in terms of retiring, the existing coal capacities. The first one is the social challenge. The second one is the energy security and affordability. So in terms of the social challenge, it has been mentioned a number of jobs, that will be at risk, that will need to change, to evolve towards new jobs, hopefully. And a lot of them, most of them, are in the developing world. It was mentioned by Mustafa. So there are key things that we need to make sure to have in the policies and in the practices when we get out of coal, is like to have proper engagement, meaningful engagement with stakeholders, of course respecting workers' rights, including rights of association, and a lot of other rights. You need to have massive training, retraining to create these opportunities that we are calling for. You need to prioritize engagement over divestment. It was mentioned by Ambassador Menon, and you need to retire earlier, but rather than divest. And of course, if you have to divest at a point, then you need to have responsible exit plans. That means taking reasonable and appropriate measures to prevent the bad impacts. So that's for the social challenges. They have been mentioned by a lot of people before. And then, of course, you have the issue of energy security and affordability. Given, the need for energy that will be immense, given also the electrification of vehicles, etc. So you need to accelerate, scale up, of course, the clean energy generation without forgetting the grid infrastructure, as was mentioned also, and the storage capacity where we might need more innovation there. And of course, you need all these innovative financing mechanisms to allow the average cost of capital to decrease. So everything has been already mentioned several times, sorry. And so let me maybe talk about what we are doing at the OECD. We work on several aspects of these. We work, of course, on the renewable energies, trying to scale up and accelerate renewable energy, working with the emerging economies to strengthen the domestic enabling conditions with a program that is called Clean Energy Finance and Investment Program. We are also working with companies to make sure that they have a responsible business conduct, and so that they identify, they prevent, and they mitigate the negative impacts of whatever they do, and to refer to what was mentioned by Ambassador Magon just now, within the coal transition initiative, we are working on developing guidance for financial institutions on what could be a good coal policy for them. So we are doing that, of course, with a lot of existing initiatives trying to be coherent, not to duplicate, but to add something.
Thanks very much, Mathilde. And now I'd like to turn to Harry, who is from the EBRD. And the EBRD is one of the MDBs working in this important area, supporting countries on their coal to clean journeys, including in Morocco and North Macedonia. And I think everyone would love to hear a little bit about how the EBRD is supporting countries, both practically and financially, and what kind of support countries need. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Alice. I mean, our starting premise in all of our countries of operation is that if you have a good market, a market which accurately prices energy, coal is more expensive than renewables. And once you start factoring in a carbon price or externality costs, the renewables will always be cheaper than the coal. So you will always get not just cleaner, but cheaper energy from renewables and from displacing coal. And actually, we're all inspired by being in this room, which shows you can actually transition away from coal. But if you look at the British experience, the inflection point in the graph, the point in which coal started to fall out of a system very rapidly, came when the UK introduced a carbon price floor. And from memory, it was something like £16 a tonne. So we're not talking about a huge carbon price, but enough to tip the balance. Very similar to the price that Mary Shapiro mentioned, actually. So what we're trying to do in the work we do with our country operation is to expose that market reality. And we do three things, essentially. One is we try to help renewables onto the system. So we do a lot of investment in renewables, and we do a lot of regulatory work to try to stimulate the introduction of renewables. And the last few years, we've had quite a bit of success, especially in the Balkans and Central Asia, where a well-run renewable auctions discloses prices that always surprise on the upside. They are always cheaper than people expect. So we now have prices in the Balkans of 4, 3, even 2.5 euro cents per kilowatt hour. Once you have those sorts of prices in the market, when you have those prices in the mindsets of policymakers, you really can start to drive rapid penetration in renewables. Second thing we do is we finance public assets to allow renewables on. And that particularly means networks. We can look forward and we can say that grids will be the barrier for almost all of our countries in terms of allowing more renewables. So we try to invest in the system. So all of this is, instead of trying to focus on getting something off the system, we focus on getting something onto the system, because we believe that once renewables are there, they will naturally displace coal. But then the third thing we try to do, and the most difficult thing, is to try to facilitate the exit, because we know that even if an exit of coal makes sense economically, it has high social costs, it has high transitional costs. And there what we try to do is we try to help support authorities designing just transition plans, and then try to deliver targeted financial support to the regions most affected. And you mentioned North Macedonia. So last year at COP28, we supported North Macedonia in launching its own Just Energy Transition Investment Platform. They called it a Just Energy Transition Investment Platform just to slightly distinguish it from a JETP. And that combines all of these things. It combines a commitment to a coal exit by 2030. It combines public investment in grids. It brings renewables investment, and we hope that soon there will be some quite significant announcements of renewables projects. But it also involves $85 million of support from the Clean Technology Fund, some of which we expect to deploy now with targeted SME credit lines in the affected regions. So it's really about those elements, and then crucially bundling them.
Thank you very much. And now I'm going to turn to John Merton. So John, Standard Chartered is a firm with a net zero commitment and transition roadmap. And you're very active globally, including in lots of emerging market and developing economies where coal is still embedded in energy systems. So could you say something about how you're thinking about this challenge and what role you think private finance could play? Thank you.
Thanks, Alice. So as a bank regulated and headquartered in the UK with a net zero 2050 finance emissions target, but with 85% of our revenue coming from Asia, the Middle East and Africa, helping the process of coal phase out proceed is sort of quite existential for us, because if consumers of power are drawing their power off a grid that is coal powered, all of their scope 2 emissions are going to be clogging up our capacity to deliver on our net zero financed emissions 2050 target. So it's really important for us in terms of doing our business. In markets where you have competitive power markets, we can naturally lean in and support coal phase out in much the way that Henry was describing by promoting the alternative and facilitating investment in renewables and in grids so that they naturally outcompete coal. Because it's not just that solar and wind are cheaper than coal, they're cheaper than the marginal cost of operating a fully depreciated coal power station in many cases. So in competitive markets, it's a natural part of our transition finance offering. In more rigid markets where you haven't got that degree of competition, and indeed as Minister Rakhmat was identifying, where you needed really rock solid PPAs to attract private finance into riskier emerging markets, in those markets it's really difficult because governments rightly have a perception that there's a tension. They don't want to smash and destroy the PPAs that were actually responsible for bringing private sector investment into the country, because that will do nothing to help them bring more private sector investment into the country. So they've got a tension that we need to help them with. And in those cases, leaning in to financing for coal phase out is something that we're very keen to do. And we think there is a role for the private sector in that, and we're involved in those negotiations. But we need air cover from regulators and politicians, because we've made a commitment to end financing of new coal, for example, and we've got various coal commitments. But if we lean in and we lend money to an SPV that's constructed for the purpose of phasing out earlier a coal power station in one of these markets, we will actually increase the financed emissions on our book. And we need the kind of political air cover to support us as we do that, because it could look like we're walking back on our climate commitments at the very moment that we're actually trying to advance them further. And to help in that regard, we need clear criteria, and the GFANZ APAC criteria on advice for phasing out of coal is really helpful in that regard, because it gives us a sort of common set of criteria around which you can generate air cover.
Thanks very much, John. And just picking up on that, Mathilde, I know that the OECD obviously is providing policy guidance to countries, but also you think a lot about finance. How do you see the opportunities and risks of the energy transition when it comes to the provision of finance? And how can we help ensure that finance flows in a responsible manner? Thanks.
Well, as you know, the OECD, we are like advising policymakers, so clearly we need to ensure that there is the right policy environment, enabling environment, both in our countries and in emerging economies, clearly. But then it's clear that the financing of coal retirement or the financing of new renewable energy will come only from the private sector at scale. So we need to encourage, and maybe what you were just saying is like, if we provide guidance as an OECD guidance on what good coal policies could look like, it could also protect the financial institutions that are doing exactly what you were just mentioning. You know, like if you invest in or engage in rather than exiting, your coal portfolio will increase, but we need to say that clearly that's the right way to go. So I think that's also part of the idea of this CTA initiative, to have guidance for financial institutions on coal policies.
Thanks very much. I think as Mary highlighted in her remarks, I think both public and private finance institutions are looking to problem solve on early coal retirement, face this challenge. And so greater recognition of what these transactions are trying to do could help. Harry, in your work with these key countries that are trying to transition, what sorts of costs are countries facing? What sort of financing needs are they facing? And how can we draw on public, private, market-based finance to try and deal with those?
Well, I think, as I mentioned, the EBRD region is quite specific, and it's very interesting hearing the experience of Southeast Asia, because we don't operate in Southeast Asia, and we aren't typically exposed to, you know, the issue of young coal plants with real asset values. Sometimes people, I mean, we work a lot in the Balkans, obviously, and I've been to quite a few Balkan power plants. In fact, the last control center I was in was Kosovo B power station, which is a pretty extraordinary place to be. if you've gone to a Balkan coal-fired power plant, people talk about stranded assets. The word stranded definitely comes to mind. The word asset is not what you think of when you first show up in the Balkan power plant. So typically, what we're not facing there is a great challenge of how do you pay out the cost. What you're really trying to do is do two things. One is ensure energy security. You know, there were power cuts in the Balkans over the weekend. That is not politically acceptable in any country. So you need to make sure that if you're going to take these large baseload plants off the grid, that there's energy security. And then also, as I mentioned, the social costs. So in terms of the financing needs, it's predominantly about the replacement. So it's about the grid investments, the renewables investments, and increasingly, I think we'll see the storage investments. And there, I think the sources are predominantly private. You know, well-structured renewable power projects can raise private capital relatively easily, actually. Distribution companies and transmission companies can normally borrow pretty effectively. You do need public money, and you probably need some grant and concessional money for the high-cost things around storage, capacity building, and so on. And then you need to ease the social costs. And the social cost is the really challenging bit because there isn't a revenue stream there. You know, there isn't a revenue stream that underpins a just transition. You need to find, so you do need concessional finance, you need grant finance, and actually importantly, you need philanthropic capital, and not least because they're our host today. I should mention that, you know, Bloomberg is very generously supporting some of the work we're trying to do in North Macedonia in exactly that area. So I think the bulk of the cost comes in building the replacement capacity, and that can be largely private. And then you need some form of public investment to support the sort of some of the grid costs. But then where you really need to target the most valuable capital of all, the highly concessional grant capital, it's around the social costs and the frictional social costs.
That's very helpful, thanks. And a couple of things to draw out there that are relevant to the coal transition work, which is both that different markets have different challenges and starting places, and we need to work with those broadly speaking. And then secondly, that we will need to pull on a really wide range of finance to make the numbers add up. Both countries that have relatively old coal plants, there are still social costs and grid investment costs and all of that. And then whether the coal plants are younger and stuck in long contracts, we also need to do something. Now, John, could you, I know that along with other private financial institutions, and as Ravi mentioned in his remarks, are thinking about how to deal with the young plants in Asia. Could you say a few words for those less familiar with it about how an early retirement transaction could be made to work from a financial perspective? How do we get the numbers to add up?
Thank you. I will answer that, Alice, but in a true panel style. Just want to pick up on something Harry's saying, which is our experience of the JET-P in South Africa, where, just as you've described, the private capital is building out the new generation in the system. And obviously the concessional capital will be used to support those communities moving away from coal. But when you look at you've also got to zoom the camera back because South African GDP is about 25% smaller than it would have been had they not had load shedding over the last decade, if there had been enough power. And actually, just transition is really important, but you lose far more jobs by not having enough power in the first place than you do through a sort of unjust transition. And I think Ravi Menon mentioned the figure of 6.7 million people involved in the coal value chain in Asia against 3 billion population and a 1.2 billion workforce. Those are relatively small numbers, and it's really important that the economic growth and job creation is not held back by a lack of clean, cheap power, which is an important point. But then in terms of how do you scale finance for managed coal phase out, it's really tricky. And there are negotiations going on for a couple of essentially deals at the moment. And we need to complete those because it's important to sort of set something in the stand. But also we need to have an eye to where they're going to be imperfect so that we can scale in the future, because I think it's quite clear that they mustn't necessarily be seen as a template, but as a first transaction to get the ball going. And a few things that I would point to. Firstly is, and it was said earlier this morning at an IEA roundtable, you can't fight big subsidies with small subsidies, okay? You can't use concessional capital to finance coal phase out if you're competing with even bigger subsidies for the coal industry in the first place. And that includes direct subsidies, but it also includes issues like domestic market obligations and all the things that make coal power apparently cheaper than it really is. So you've got to tackle domestic subsidies. Secondly, as Ravi Menon said earlier, carbon credits for coal phase out are hugely important. and the sums really do add up. And it's really important that we use carbon credits when we're financing early coal phase-out transactions in the future, and there are clear criteria for doing that so that they are an attractive credit, a high-value credit that companies want to buy and have value and support the transition. Thirdly, I'd suggest we need to be wary of burdening coal phase-out transactions with too many couplings with future renewable energy build-out, particularly in Asia, where you're looking at new coal plants, 8-10 years old. Even if they run sort of 10 years shorter than their planned life, 15 years shorter than their planned life, they're not going to be shut down for another 15 years or so. And you kind of let the future take care of itself in that regard. We know that solar costs have come down 85% in the last decade. Solar will be another 85% cheaper in a decade's time, and storage too. So don't worry about renewables build out in 15 years' time. Let's concentrate on financing coal phase out now and inking those deals, because you don't need to burden it with that future renewable energy. That will look after itself. You need a permissive legal environment. So you need to be able to enable power companies and utilities owners to market essentially the value of their assets on their books. And there are some jurisdictions where that's sort of a very difficult thing to do, and we need to tackle that. We also need to look at our own houses here in Western sort of regulatory environments to make sure that we're not penalised for long-term lending in emerging markets, and we don't have to hold unreasonable quantities of capital against that, because that will be a dissimilar to putting money towards that. And finally, and this is, I'm speaking personally rather than for the bank, my own take is that you need a bit of a haircut limbo, in the sense of if you are going to persuade asset owners to take a haircut, there needs to be the precedent that every future haircut will be bigger than the one you've just agreed. You need to create a bit of jeopardy for asset owners to think that if they don't agree a deal to decommission their asset early now, the terms are only going to get worse, and that will persuade people to come forward with assets that they want to bring to the decommissioning party.
Thanks very much, John. I think we'll all take away the image of the haircut limbo with us at the end of the day. And I would say that very much the work we're all doing this year is focused on where countries do want to take an ambitious early lead on early coal to clean transitions, that there should be support there. So I think hopefully those that want to do that can come forward, and we'll try and make it work across public and private sectors. Brilliant. Well, my timer is flashing red, so I'd better hand back to Julia. But thanks very much to this excellent panel. Thank you.
To Alice and to all the speakers. We finished the last panel with a note of optimism, but I think we finished that panel as well with a real note of optimism. I'm really inspired by the fact that it feels like we are on the cusp of being able to find ways of financing these transactions, financing the early retirement of a coal power plant, and that makes me feel really optimistic. The Powering Past Coal Alliance has recognized since its beginning the role that finance has to play in accelerating the transition, and that's why we have our finance principles. But because we are so excited by this conversation at the moment about how we can play a role in giving confidence to private finance to be part of this transition, we're refreshing our finance principles at the moment, and we'll be launching them later this year. So watch this space to hear what we're doing to try and support change in this area. So we're coming towards the end of the dialogue now. I'm sure that you're all keen to move to talking to each other and to networking. Before we do, and before we move to our conclusion, I wanted to say just a brief word about these solutions dialogues and where we go to next. So I think you all know by now that we're not yet on track for 1.5, that accelerating the phase out of coal is the most important thing we can do. The transition is happening, there are clear benefits everywhere in terms of economics, energy security, and also health, but there are also big challenges. And that's where we think the Powering Past Coal Alliance comes in. With our membership of over 180 drawn from national governments, from regional governments, from financial institutions, from utilities and from systems operators, we think there's now a remarkable reservoir of expertise, experience and influence that we can really use to drive this transition. And in this year, as countries are thinking about how do they update their nationally determined contributions, how do they really put in place the commitments we need to see to no new coal, to phase out by 2030 and phase out in the developing and emerging economies by 2040? How can we provide the support which is needed to make those aspirations possible? That's what we're trying to do through the solutions dialogues. We have 3 themes. So we've heard about all of the themes today: the importance of enabling the early retirement of coal power plants, the importance of a just transition, which protects the interests of workers and communities that have been dependent on coal, and the importance of energy security. So how do we keep the lights on as the demand for energy grows and we're trying to transition out of coal? We started here today as the UK phases out of coal in this amazing venue. We're going next to Chile. So at the end of August, we'll be in Chile and hosting a dialogue with the Chilean government. Then we'll be in Indonesia. We'll be at the Indonesia Sustainability Forum with our speaker today, Rahmat Kaimuddin, digging into some of the issues around early retirement. Next, we'll be at New York talking about nationally determined contributions. Then we'll be in Singapore and in Malaysia in October to dig into some of the energy security issues and just transition issues. We'll bring it all back together at COP29, where we hope to be able to share some of the key solutions that we've been talking about and also set out a clear agenda for next steps. We hope that you stay participating in these dialogues. We really want to hear from all of you. What are the key issues we need to be looking at? And what are your ideas for how we can be shifting the dial on this? So stay tuned, join our dialogues, follow us on our internet site or on social media, and do get in touch with your ideas. As I said, this brings us to the end of today's dialogue, but we're really pleased that for a kind of final uplifting keynote, we have Damilola Ogunbiyi from Sustainable Energy for All, the CEO of Sustainable Energy for All and the United Nations the UNSG's Special Advisor on Sustainable Energy for All. We're so pleased that you can bring this dialogue to a really kind of high note of conclusion.
Quite an opening. I'm going to try my best. Thank you so much for having me here. It's really great in the last few years since I took over this role, just to see how much work has actually gone on in the Powering Past Coal Alliance. I mean, I think it's important to note that we're not out of the woods when it comes to coal and coal phase out. There's still many countries that are considering coal. And this is one of the great things about this alliance, because it's making people rethink a lot of their decisions just based on the economics of it all. And we have to just keep on realizing that every time it seems very, very painful and somebody backtracks, that there is, you know, still 1 billion people that are living with energy poverty, that their countries, unfortunately, are still considering coal options. So I really wanted to put that at the forefront and just explain just how important this work that's going on right here matters. Again, the pathway to this hasn't been easy. Us at the UN, we have something called the UN Energy Compact, of which we have many countries signing up to no new coal. So while we're phasing out, we need to make sure that no new coal is built as well, of which we're so excited that PPCA is one of our strong partners and has really been leading the conversation at the UN. There was one point that was made, you know, the NDCs, or the nationally determined contributions, are actually due in February. I know everyone makes it seem like, you know, it's so far away, but they're not. A lot of you here in this room, you have access to governments, you have access to private sector, you have access to philanthropy that influences a lot of these decisions. It's really important that the work that's going on with these solution dialogues are reflected into the energy transition plans of a lot of these countries. In countries that are not doing coal, they don't even have it as a consideration. So I just want to just reflect just the power that is in this room to really, really influence how globally we go towards 1.5. One of the other things in partnership that we've been doing is really focusing on the developing countries. It's all well and good trying to transition in the developed countries and some of the emerging economies, but when you don't have enough energy, it's a complete different conversation when you say transition. I mean, we actually had a running joke when I was last in Abuja, which is Nigeria, my country, and I remember one of the ministers said, transition out of what? And I was like, this is a real thing. When you have to 20x the amount of energy you use, it's a difficult conversation. So working with the PPCA, we're really focused on what does an energy transition look like when you don't have enough energy, and how do we have a one-in-a-lifetime opportunity to make sure people get on the energy ladder being clean from the beginning instead of coming back to transition. So yeah, I know everybody wants to have a drink and go home. I don't blame you, I want to do the same. So that's basically about as uplifting as I can get. But I just want to thank, I want to thank all of you. This is really, really important work, and I really believe this is going to really define our generation. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Damilola. You more than fit the bill of an uplifting conclusion. All that's left for me to say is now do join us for drinks at the other end of the hall. Thank you very much, everyone.